One of the things that I have wrestled with, I guess, somewhat, is what is worship. I struggle with that a lot. In fact, it has become somewhat of a. If I could be honest with you, it has become somewhat of a pet peeve when I hear things like things like worship leader. Because are you telling me that for somebody to get up and to lead songs, and Jimmy does a great job leading songs and leading us in congregational worship, um, uh, that is the extent of what we do? Really, that's worship. Um, I hear things like, they've just got a wonderful sense of worship there. And really what they're saying is that they go into some kind of transcendental state, and they go into some kind of emotional deal, and there's just such a wonderful sense of worship they fall on the floor. Oh, I'm not sure that falling on the floor is a sense of worship. I'm not sure about that. I don't know about that. I guess my cynical brain is questioning all of those kinds of things. What is worship? What is worship? How do we do that? How do we do that corporately? We wouldn't dare miss a worship service. I don't know. I just think that worship has got to be, if we really view God in the proper way. Yes, this is corporate worship, what we do, and this is extremely important. Extremely. But I want to say that it is not an end in itself. It is a means to an end. Okay? So this is kind of like not even jumping off the diving board. This is kind of like walking up the steps of the diving board, what we do here. And then all the rest it would be called worship, what we do on every day of our life. And so people say, "Oh, I'd never do that in church because that's a place where we worship God." Well, do you realize that God has chosen not to live in temples not made with hands, but He has chosen to live in you and I? And that we carry around God within inside of us, and His Spirit lives inside. And so everything that we do, now get this, everything that we do is a sense of worship to Him. Oh, I'm going to slough off on my job for 15 minutes. Really? Really? You're going to do that? Because it's not that you're cheating really the company, although that's part of it. What are you doing as far as worshiping God? So if we could get this concept of what happens for all of our life, we could get this concept of that everything that we do, we worship God. Why yesterday we worshiped God by painting. Bob Tinker worshiped God by putting in our furnace and getting our furnace. Man, Bob, thanks for worshiping God. I like the way you worship. Yeah. Especially in the winter time. All of those kinds of things. But all of it is worship. And so, but there is a difference, I guess. He says, where two or three are gathered, He would be in the midst of them. But He's in the midst of myself. And so, but that has to do with reconciliation and what's going on. We won't get into that. But I've often wondered if all of the churches, we went down Hopeful Church Road this morning, and Kathy, it dawned on her. She said, "Man, there's a lot of churches on this road." I said, "Do you know what road you're on?" She said, yes, I'm on Hopeful Church. Oh, yeah. So now last week I said something about my wife. She wasn't in here. And immediately you guys went and told her something. You're bad to me. You're not nice to me. But anyway, I've often, out of all of the churches in this area, I've often wondered if God, Jesus Christ, came to our church, what would he do? Really, what would he do? If he were to be here right now, and he is in spirit, but I'm talking about in the flesh, what would he do? And we're going to talk a little bit about that. You know, there's a story told, this is a funny story, about a man who walked into a gift shop that sold religious items. I love those places. And near the cash register, he saw a display of caps in there, and on the caps was printed WWJD, which simply means, what would Jesus do? And that's kind of old, that's kind of dating myself, but printed on those caps was WWJD. He was puzzled over the letters, what they could mean, but couldn't figure it out. So he asked the clerk. He said, he replied, and they said, and he asked him, what does these letters WWJD mean? And the clerk said, oh, that is, what would Jesus do? Oh, what would Jesus do? The man said. And the clerk said, yes, what would Jesus do? WWJD. And the man looked at him and thought for a moment, and he said, I'm pretty sure Jesus would not pay $17.95 for this cap. Whoever came up with that, first of all, whoever came up with that clever little phrase, what would Jesus do, created an easy way for Christians somehow to examine our lives. But I think he wants to go one step further, and I've said this for many years because I heard it, this isn't original. I don't think that he wants us to ask, what would Jesus do? I think he wants to instill with us the mind of Christ so that when we don't even have to ask that, we already know that. But it is a good test. For example, what movie would he have me go see? When we ask that question, it kind of boils it down, doesn't it? What specific magazine would Jesus want me to purchase? Someone at work you're having a hard time dealing with, ask the question, what would Jesus do with this guy that's kind of a little bit hard to deal with? What would he do? My child is difficult to handle and is frequently disobedient. What would Jesus do? Now, just because I asked that question, that doesn't mean that I'm always going to make the right decision, of course. Or even that I'll always be able to determine precisely what he would have done. For example, what would Jesus do in corporate worship? Almost from the beginning of Jesus' recorded life, we find that corporate worship was very important to him. When Jesus was 12 years old, as a matter of fact, his parents misplaced him. They had gone from Jerusalem for a feast of the Passover. I want to tell you that is a very easy thing to do, especially if you are in the ministry, but if you are a regular attender at church. Especially when your kids are constantly going over other people's houses and visiting friends. It is a very easy thing to misplace your children. We did it so many times, especially in Florida. We would say, have you seen Rachel? Where's Rachel? Well, she must have went over so-and-so's house because we don't see her. And then we would rush back to church, and there Rachel would be, sitting there waiting for us, of course, crying and all upset, and or Sarah or whoever it was. But here's what happened. They hurried back to Jerusalem after 3 days. 3 days. Like, well, how do you miss a kid for 3 days? Honestly. Like, Jesus, it's time for school. No Jesus. I mean, well, how do you miss a kid for 3 days? But they missed Jesus for 3 days. And so they got the bright idea. You know what? The last place we saw Jesus was in the synagogue. So they went back and they looked for him. And here's what, when his parents saw him, they were astonished. His mother said to him, "Son, why have you treated us like this? And your father and I have been anxiously searching for you." Yeah, I would think so. "Why were you searching for me?" he asked. "Didn't you know I had to be in my Father's house?" From the very beginning, Jesus considered all other commitments to be secondary. Now, I want to stop right there just for a second. I want you to hear me. I want you to hear me. I'm trying to be nice here. I'm trying to be kind. I'm trying to be gentle. Jesus considered all other commitments to be secondary to his relationship to the Father. Jesus never missed being in corporate worship. We okay with that? Amen, Don Carter? Okay. In Luke, it says this: he went to Nazareth, where he had been brought up. On the Sabbath day, he went to the synagogue, and what? As was his custom was to be in the synagogue every Sabbath. Of course, that was on Friday night. From Friday night, you'd have to give up a Friday night. From Friday night till Saturday night, that's when their corporate worship was held in the synagogue. And I've often thought, why in the world did he view it as such an important thing when here he was God himself. And yet he viewed it as important. So what that tells me is that no matter how saintly you get, no matter how godly you get, that it's got to be an important part of your life. Would we dare say that? No, we wouldn't dare say that. Yes, we would. That the less godly we are, the even more important that is? We wouldn't say that. Well, Jesus never skipped worship, corporate worship. He told Mary he had to be about his Father's house. When Jesus was at the home of Martha and Mary, Mary sat at Jesus' feet while he taught. You remember that? In Luke, it says, Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me." "Martha," the Lord answered, "you are worried and upset about many things, but only one thing is needed. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from him." So being in church was important to Jesus. Therefore, it should be important to us, correct? Now, I realize, of course, that I am preaching to individuals who are in church. So it's kind of redundant. I remember we had a choir in the very first church I came to, we had this choir, and the choir leader would spend the first 25 minutes, honest to goodness, scolding the people that came to choir practice, scolding the people as to why people didn't come to choir practice. Finally, I called her in my office. I got the courage enough, as a 29-year-old person, I finally got the courage enough to say, "Why are you scolding the people that are there, for crying out loud?" So maybe I should take this out into the streets, or maybe I should go and knock on house doors and say, "Hey, you know what? You need to be here." But I'm telling you anyway. So being in church is very important. I heard this clever comment someone had made: the great task of the church is to get sinners into heaven and saints out of bed. Now that's funny, but it really isn't true. If you love Jesus, then you make every effort to be in church, because that's what he would have done. But now, what would Christ do in worship? Back in 2000, the Washington Post carried a story about a man who had spent 9 years walking through 13 countries and 47 states, wearing a white robe and walking barefoot. When he wasn't hitchhiking, the local paper called him the man who looks like Jesus, and that is what he intended. He wanted people to think of Jesus when they saw him. As a result, local church had their pews filled with people they hadn't seen in 20 years. And when the man visited the hospital, a couple of doctors reported that their patients healed more rapidly after he came to see them. He dressed like Jesus. He acted like Jesus in literal ways. So in that we should do. Should we dress like Jesus did when he went to synagogue? Well, the Bible doesn't tell us a lot about how Jesus dressed when he went to worship, so that must not be all that important to God. But the scriptures do tell us a lot about what Jesus did when he got there. I've told you before, but the biggest question I've ever been asked about corporate worship time is, what shall I wear? Evidently, that has been a nagging thought on people's mind about what shall I wear. Now, when I was in Florida, I used to say, and now I don't say it here because it's colder here, and I've gotten a little more wise because I think somebody might do it. But I used to say, wear your bathing suit, for crying out loud. I don't care. But I'm afraid that somebody might take me up on that now. So I don't say that any longer. I remember in fact, it was while I've been here for the last 5.5 years, the very first time I wore jeans to church. Of course, the very first time I wore black jeans to church. I was faking everybody out. Because there's something very, very evil about denim. Khaki's probably thinner and all of that, but, denim, that's bad, that's evil. Levi Strauss was probably a satanic occult worshiper or something. I wasn't quite sure. But I remember the very first time I said to Kathy, I'm going to wear jeans to church. And I felt such a freedom. But the bottom line is, it really doesn't matter if you dress up or you dress down. And neither one of us can look at either side that wants to dress up, or neither one of us can look down at the people that want to dress down. It doesn't matter. Who cares? It doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. So we can't look at the person that wants to wear the suit and tie or whatever they want to do. If you want to do that, that's fine. That's cool. That's awesome. In fact, my wife even told me, I put the vest on. I was looking good this morning. She said, you look nice today. I thought to myself, man, I must not look nice normally. I got a little paranoid, So, I'm lost right now. Thank you. Oh, yeah. Back in the 2000, the Washington Post carried a story. Oh, yeah, I told you about this guy with the white robe. Okay, what did Jesus do? First of all, when he came to corporate worship, he taught. Listen to what it says. When Jesus was being challenged by the high priest, Jesus answered him, I spoke openly to the world. I always taught in the synagogue and in the temple where the Jews always meet. And in secret I have said nothing. So in other words, he didn't say, you know what? I need some time off. I really need time off. He taught while he was here. Secondly, he healed people while he was in the synagogue. Listen to what it says. Mark chapter 3 tells us that another time he went into the synagogue and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Some of them were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched him closely to see if he would heal him on the Sabbath. And Jesus said to the man with the shriveled hand, stand up in front of everyone and show them what I have done. Then Jesus asked them, which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill? But they remained silent. They looked around them in anger and deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts, said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and his hand was completely restored. I can't teach like Jesus taught. I'd like to. I wish I could, but I can't. In fact, there isn't a preacher on the face of this earth, including Billy Graham or whoever it is, that can teach as good as Jesus taught. There isn't anybody that can do that. He was a master at doing that. And the last time I healed anybody was when I gave myself an antibiotic for a terrible cold that I had. That's the last time. So I can't even begin to think of healing people like Jesus healed people. So if I can't teach like Jesus taught, I can't heal like he healed, how could I possibly worship the way he did? Well, I was thinking about this. It occurred to me that even though I couldn't teach or heal as Jesus were, there were things about how Jesus behaved in corporate worship that I could copy. First of all, Jesus was active. He was not passive. Can I say that again? Jesus was active. Jimmy, did you hear me? Jesus was active. He was not passive in his worship. He did not come, you guys, to be entertained. People who come to be entertained spend their time evaluating other people who worship rather than actually worshiping themselves. In other words, did you see that guy? Man, I have heard over and over again about how people who had some kind of strange worship. Well, I want to tell you, if you are lost and engaged in corporate worship, you're not going to notice when other people do it wrong. That's the bottom line. It's not going to happen. You're not going to notice it. It's not going to occur to you. It's not going to occur to you when people get nutso or whatever they do. It's just not going to occur to you because you are so engaged in the active worship, corporate worship, that you're not going to notice when others do it wrong. They'll criticize the sermon or the skill of the people in the sound booth, Billy. Or they'll watch over other people to see if they're singing or not. Man, they didn't even sing. Did you see them? They just sat there. How do you know that? Or even how much others put in the offering plate. The plate went right by them. I didn't see them put a dime in. That's why I'm so glad for push pay and electronic giving now. Isn't that great? People don't know if you do or you don't. Except for Steve Allender, he walked down this morning, and I said, "It's about time you started giving again." I saw that he had a envelope there. Yeah, I'm glad he started giving again. And I was watching you, Steve. Those individuals, they have not come to worship, they've come to be entertained. But Jesus didn't come to be entertained. Jesus didn't come. He came for one single purpose and one single purpose only, and it is still our purpose today, and that is to honor God in a corporate way as we gather together and we honor God in our worship. Second, Jesus used the talents he had to serve God and man. Now granted, none of us have the abilities Jesus had. We can't teach like he taught. We can't heal like he healed. But God has given you talents that we can use in corporate worship and just worship to God as a whole. Like I said, we worshiped God yesterday by painting. That was worshiping God. I can't do that well. I don't do it well. I get runners. People have to come up and back of me, and they have to do what they got to do. But I can slop some paint up there, I can tell you that. And then there was a group of individuals, individuals the day before that just moved a bunch of junk. That's all they did. They don't like to paint, probably. They just moved junk. That's all they did. They're good junk movers. But they moved junk for Jesus.
Right. Amen. Yeah.
Bill Lynch took our junky couches and and a junky countertop and gave it out. Now, what Bill did with that, I'm not sure. Maybe he touched it and multiplied it or something. Jesus used the talents he had to serve God with. Every time one of you, how can I use those talents? Every time one of you has served communion or take up the offering, you've worshiped just like Jesus did. Every time you've worked in the nursery, can I say this again? Every time you've worked in the nursery or the junior church or you've taught in Sunday school, you've worshiped like Jesus did. Every time you've seen someone in church who suffered a tragedy or lost someone they've loved, or you spent time praying with them and comforting them, you've worshiped like Jesus did. Every time you've seen someone sitting alone in worship and you've gone over to them, you've given them your name and welcomed them to church, you've worshiped like Jesus did. Every time you've made somebody else feel a part of God's family, you have worshiped like Jesus worships. Why? Because you use your talents to serve God. Let me give you a little story. These are always watched by my mom and dad. And so my dad's going to be mad at me for giving this story, but I don't care. He's 81. I can whoop him now. I can whoop him. 81, I feel good about that, boy. Finally. He's 81. My dad was outstanding. He was a butcher, okay? A meat cutter by trade. He worked in a meat packing plant. As a matter of fact, when I was old enough and I was a pastor, I went to his meat packing plant, and it was freezing cold and it was dark and there was no windows. And so when I left there, it was kind of an aha moment for me, in the sense that I realized that that's what my dad did for all of those years for myself and my sister and my mom. And so I said, "Hey, Dad, Dad, thanks." And he said, "For what?" And I said, "Dad, this is a horrible place to work." "Really? You think so?" I said, "Yeah, but you know what? You did it for us. Thank you, Dad." He said, "Let's go to lunch." He didn't think anything about it. But anyway, my dad was an individual who was also an outstanding, and I mean an outstanding, head usher. That's back in the days where we had head ushers and subordinates underneath them, and you had junior ushers. That's how I did that. I did junior usher. I was a junior usher, and you had all of those, and so Dad though on his job was not particularly outgoing. He was extremely outgoing, and there were pastors that came through there, and they would say, "You know, your dad is the best usher we've ever had in the history, ever. So I asked him to serve at my first church. I said, "Dad, I don't have an usher." And he was down there visiting, and there was this guy, and so Dad went out there, and "Yeah, I'll pass out bulletins," and he was passing out bulletins, greeting people, saying hello to people, just like he knew them for years and years and years. And so there was this guy there. He was kind of not very outgoing, and he comes in, and he goes, "Your dad." I said, "Something wrong with my dad?" He said, No. You got to get him to move down here." And I said, "Why is that?" And he said, "Man, he's the best I've ever seen doing that." And my dad did that tremendously. He could talk and meet with anybody, just like they were his buddy from long time ago. But here's the deal. In the olden days, what we used to do was, we used to say, if the ushers would now come forward, And it was really a formal thing. So the ushers would walk forward, of course, in their suit and ties. And Dad would enforce that, by the way. And so they would walk forward, and then the pastor would call on one of the ushers to pray. And my dad, one Sunday, I see him, he's practically hanging out of the car, bending over. I said, Dad, what's wrong? They asked me to pray. I said, yeah? He said, that makes me sick when they do that. Have somebody else pray. I said, Dad, you meet with hundreds of people every week. What are you talking about? He said, yeah, but they asked me to pray. Now, did my dad pray? Yes. I've seen my dad pray. I've heard my dad pray. Did he pray? Yes, he can pray. My dad can do that. But man, when it came to corporately, he did not want to do that. And I want to tell you, he did not want to do that. So we all have different gifts. Look at what it says. And let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds. Let us not give up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing. Let me read that again. And let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds. Let us not give up meeting together, because if we stop meeting together, we can't spur each other on to love and good deeds, as some are in the habit of doing. Are you serious? Way back in the Hebrew day, they wrote. But let us encourage one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. What is the day? The day of Jesus Christ's return. Like I said, being in church was important to Jesus. Jesus wants us to realize that not only is church important to him, but he also wanted us to understand that when we honor him by making this kind of worship a top priority in our lives, he intended us to reward us for that. Jesus promised, where two or three come together in my name, there I am also. When you come to church, your primary reason for being here should not because you like me, because you just shouldn't. It shouldn't be because you want to get together with your friends. It shouldn't be because you've got nothing else to do on a Sunday morning. You shouldn't be in church. You should be in church because that's where Jesus will be. Done. Is Cleveland playing today over in London?
No, they did.
Oh, 2 weeks ago. Oh, and you were here. You made the sacrifice to miss your Owen whatever Browns to come to church. Let's just give Don a hand, can we? Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Now, if they were 9-0,
They're going to be 8-8.
oh yeah, right, Don. He promised to be here. I remember reading a story who always made it to church every Sunday morning with her 6 children in tow, all a bit rumpled, but nevertheless on time. One woman was scarcely able to get one child ready. And so she asked how her friend managed to get her brood so efficiently. Easy, she replied with a smile. I dressed them the night before. I want to tell you, I went out. This is a side note. I went out to my kid's house out in Washington. Right, they've got 3 kids now. Right, one is just little bitty thing, and the rest have grown a little bit. And one is 7. Liam's 7. He's just the nicest boy in the world, but he just. You ask him to go up and get dressed, and 15 minutes later, he's still in his underwear running around and reading a Captain Underpants book or something like that. And then Olivia, she is just obstinate. I mean, honestly, I might have to perform an exorcism on her. Don't tell Sarah I said that, but I mean to tell you, it is like a time warp, ominously, that we went back 30 years, and what I'm looking at is a little Sarah. You tell her yes, she says no. You tell her get around, she says no. You tell her to wear the red shirt, she says I'm wearing the blue shirt. I mean, it is her lot in life to just defy you. And that's exactly like her mother was. Exactly. I mean, it is like I am looking, and I told Sarah this, it is like I am looking at a little Sarah every single time. And I say, glory to God. And every time she defies her mom, I'm just like, hallelujah. And this little pill, I want to tell you, this little pill is taking her to task. And it is wonderful. She is getting paid back for everything she ever did to her dad. Everything. There's a reason why church is so important to Jesus. I want to close with this. The church is the body of Christ. We are part of him. And the church is the bride of Christ. We are precious to him. And one day he will return to take his bride away to be with him forever. Jesus died on a cross to create this church, not the bricks and mortar. As a matter of fact, I met with the staff and I said, after this back here is done, we are done with building projects. Do you understand me, Wayne Helton? We are done. D-O-N-E, done. Hallelujah is right. And then we're going to go into a big building project. Other builders, where it's turnkey, you know what that means? We call in a bunch of guys, they do that. They're gifted by Jesus to do that. Okay, where did I stop here? Jesus died on the cross to create this church. Not the bricks and mortar building and the worship, but of believers that we are, the bride of Christ that we are, purchased to become. And when you accepted his offer of salvation, when you believed on his name, when you repented of your sins, when you made him Lord and Master of your life, when you accepted his offer of salvation, you signed up to be a part of this thing that we call, not begrudgingly, but the church. The church. Even pagans understand this. Voltaire, an enemy of Christianity in the 18th century, predicted that within 100 years of this day, this was in the 18th century, of his day, Christianity would be nothing but a relic of the past. But he had to admit that in order for this to happen, the world would first have to get rid of Sunday corporate worship. He said there is no hope of destroying Christianity so long as the Christian Sabbath is kept as a sacred day. But in order for Sunday to have that kind of importance to you, you first need to belong to Jesus. You can go to church all day long, but unless you belong to Jesus, the church will actually do very little for you.